kind of hard to whisper a secret to me. And you have to put it on a bullhorn for me to hear. In our pursuit to understand prayer as a weapon in spiritual warfare, today we're going to discuss the prayer of faith. Prayer of faith is probably the most effective form of prayer that we have talked about. But when we start talking about faith, Jesus talked about faith in terms of stories. He didn't give us a lot of theological definitions and abstractions and things like that. And so we're going to spend some time with Bible stories this morning and learning some things that we can. Okay? Let's begin with our text in Matthew 21, 18 through 22. Again, I believe this is a familiar story. Early in the morning, as he was on his way back to the city, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree by the road, he went up to it, but found nothing on it except leaves. He said to it, "May you never bear fruit again." Immediately the tree withered. When the disciples saw this, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree wither so quickly?" they asked. Jesus replied, "I tell you the truth. If you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but also you can say to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer." Now, if you have faith and do not doubt, you can say to this mountain, "Be removed," and go into the sea. Now, my first interpretation of that is something like this. I've got faith, and this mountain needs to move. And so I say, "Mountain, be removed and cast into the sea." Now what you have to understand, they're on Mount Olivet, and they're about 20 miles from the Mediterranean Sea. It's just over there a little bit. And so what happens is, you get also a rumbling. All of a sudden the mountain begins to lift off, and somebody says, "Houston, we have liftoff." And it flips over, Balusha, into the Mediterranean Sea, and we get a tsunami the whole way around the world, you know? Now, I'm not saying that that's not possible, and quite possibly what Jesus was talking about. But you have to understand, and it wasn't until I visited Israel that I got a broader take on this. And the road that Jesus was talking on and where they did the fig tree, our tour guide dropped us off in the vicinity of where that fig tree was. And it's on the backside of the Mount of Olives. And if you turn around, you can look and you can see Herod's summer palace, the Herodium. Helps if you punch the right button. The Herodium was an absolutely opulent palace. What I can tell you is, now you see, Marilyn, if that doesn't interrupt me, that has to interrupt. Is Jesus calling you during the service already? Oh my. Anyhow, this palace is utterly opulent. Even today in its ruins, you can see that it was just a magnificent structure. But what is unique about it, you can see that there's an earthwork piled around it. And this is a swimming pool with a fountain. These things over here were motel rooms for guests. I mean, it was something. But you can see that mountain, and it would look like, you look at it from the air, it kind of looked like you were looking down into the crater of a volcano. Well, the way Herod built that was he took the top off of this mountain over here on your left. Can you see how flat that is? They took it by shovel and pack mules and whatever. They shoveled that in, and they carried that across the valley between the two and put the earthworks on that on the top, which is amazing. You can see it when you're looking at that. Now they're standing here and they're looking at this, and you can see what can happen, and that brings us to another interpretation that we're talking about. Faith can move mountains, even if it's only one shovelful at a time. James said faith without works is dead. And I'm afraid that too many times we look for the miraculous when really it's an application of the mundane. But it gives us the strength and the grace to go on. And so when we begin to look at the prayer of faith, we realize that there's going to be some practical things that go with us. Now the other thing that happened, and again, I've preached these sermons several times, and as I studied for this one, I came across something I'd never put together before, and that is that there are degrees of faith. I want to start off with the story of the centurion's great faith. Now what happens is Jesus comes into Capernaum, and a centurion comes up to him, and he says to him, my servant is paralyzed and in great pain. Would you heal him? And Jesus said, well, would you like for me to come over? I'll do it. And the centurion says, oh no. I'm not worthy to have you come into my house. But if you will just speak the word, my servant will be healed. Jesus was amazed, absolutely amazed. He says, I want you to understand, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. And so what he did, he says, be it as your faith says, and from that moment, the servant was healed. Let's pick it apart a little bit. He said, you have great faith. The term great in the Greek there is tasutos. It means so vast, so large, so much, so high. So this centurion had a grace that had a faith that outstripped even the children of Israel. It was just vast. Now, remember we talked last week that to have faith, it's got to come from outside of you and work to the inside of you. And so the question is, how did this man get so much faith? And it was simply Jesus' reputation as a healer and an exorcist that inspired this man's faith. What did he say? He said, well, Jesus, you don't have to come. I am a man under authority, and I've got people reporting to me. I say to this one, go, and he goes. I say to this one, come, and he comes. And all you have to do, he saw it with the various things that were going on, all you have to do is speak to the word, and it's going to happen. And it did. Now, pardon me.
You need Mike.
Actually, that's Ricola.
That's what he do.
That's what he would give me. So what we have here is a man who simply by observation of the works of Jesus built a huge faith. I think that some of the disciples were so close to the forest they couldn't see the trees. They saw all that. They saw what was going on, but they missed a great part of it to inspire their faith. Great faith. The next is the Syrophoenicians' great faith. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus went to the region of Tyre with his disciples so that he could be alone and could teach them some. Well, word got out that he was in the area, and this woman comes to him. Now, she's not a Jew. She's a Gentile. And she comes to him, and she says, Jesus, will you please heal my daughter? She's got a devil, and it's tormenting her. Will you please heal her? And Jesus said to her, look, lady, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel, and it's really not proper for the master to give the children's food to the dogs. He just insulted her royally, okay? He just did. The Jews, in their pride, looked down on these people especially. But this woman ignored the insult and said, yes, but the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. Jesus says, woman, how great is your faith. Go, your daughter's healed. Right? Here, great is megas. We get our word mega from it, you know. So you got a mega monster sandwich at McDonald's. You got everything from cereal boxes to shampoo is the mega size. And her faith was mega sized. And having said that, I find it interesting that her faith transcended Jesus' insult, his first insulting refusal. Now, I'm telling you, that kind of faith is just amazing to me. What we have. Some of us, you know, people look at us cross-eyed. We disappear into a puddle of grease. But this woman took an insult, and her faith transcended all of that. It's no wonder Jesus was amazed and said, I haven't seen faith like this in Israel. Oh, by the way, these are as far as I know, as far as I can recall, these are the only two instances in the Gospels where Jesus commended them for their great faith. And both of them were Gentiles. Both of them were Gentiles. On the other hand, we get into a situation here of little faith. The one I want to focus on first is the disciples' failure to exorcise the demon from a possessed boy. They were just coming off the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus was up there with Peter, James, and John. And as they got to the bottom, a crowd comes running to them. And this man has his son and takes him and says, "Jesus, I brought my son to your disciples, and he's got a demon, and it tries to destroy him. Oftentimes it casts him into the fire, throws him into the water. And if you can, please do something." And Jesus says, "If I can, all things are possible to him that believe." And in desperation, the man says words I think that are critical. "I believe, but help my unbelief." That signals something to us. Oftentimes we're shaky. And I often think that it's a problem. The problem is the difference between possible and probable. There was a man came to Jesus and said, I need your help. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "Well, I'm blind. I can't see." Jesus said, "Okay." He said, "If you will, you can heal me." And Jesus said, "I will," and heals him right on the spot. And too often our problems that we struggle with is not a question of can. It's a question of will. And this man simply admits his weakness. Jesus, at this point, becomes highly frustrated and says, "Oh, you foolish and wicked generation, how long will I have to put up with you?" And he was speaking of his disciples. Well, the boy was healed. And the disciples came to him privately and said, "Jesus, why couldn't we cast the demon out? Why?" And the first thing we need to realize is that he had given them authority to cast out demons, and they had done so many times. Remember the story of the first mission where he sent them out 2 by 2, and they came rejoicing back and said, "Lord, even the demons are subject to us." What happened between then and now? And what he does, he charges them with little faith. Now, I have to say something here about the text. If you read this story in your King James, it translates it and says, "because of your unbelief." In the textual work that's been done since the Greek text that the King James was translated from, there has been a number of manuscripts found. And those manuscripts changed the word from apistis, without faith, to olegiapistis, little faith. And so your more modern translations of little faith seem to be the most accurate. It wasn't their unbelief, it was their little faith. He begins to talk about then that you can move mountains with mustard seed faith. Well, we've come back to this mountain thing we started off with. Only the difference is He doesn't say, if you believe and are fully convinced. He doesn't say that. He says, if you have faith as a mustard seed. Now, a lot of times we'll misquote that and say, the size of a mustard seed. And there is a truth to that, a small thing. But it's as a mustard seed. And what's the difference there? Well, mustard seed faith can grow. And one of the things that we have about coming with great faith and being able to pray in faith is the fact that faith has to be a living thing. And apparently what had happened with the disciples, and it could happen to us in church, we get to where things work, and that's the way we do it. Now, they cast out demons for the better part of 2 years, and so they knew how to do it. They had it all wired. They had it all straightened up. What you do is you go in and you do this, and then you do that. You say this, you say that, and the demon's gone. Poof. Their faith needed to grow a little bit. Jesus did say, however, this kind only goes out by prayer. And again, it's a debatable thing, prayer and fasting. The bulk of the evidence seems to lay on just prayer, but there's a pretty strong evidence for prayer and fasting to go with that. And so it required prayer to cast it out. Now, what you have to understand is there are actually several things through the book of Matthew where Jesus accuses them of little faith. In the Sermon on the Mount, he said, why do you worry about the clothes you're going to wear and the food you're going to eat, O you of little faith? Okay. Worry kills faith. You've heard me say it 1,000,000 times. After all, why pray when you can worry? Now, in Matthew 8:26, Jesus said, let's go to the other side. He was worn out. He was in the back of the boat, and the storm came up. Looked like the boat was going to be swamped, and they woke Jesus up. Oh, Jesus, don't you care that we're going to die? And he said, oh, you of little faith, why are you worried? Now, I'm going to tell you something. The storm was real. And these guys were fishermen and knew that lake like the back of their hand. The danger was real. They forgot two things. Number one, Jesus said, let's go to the other side. And that's where they were going. The second thing they forgot was who was in the boat with them. Amen? And so what we find is that fear will kill faith, and we have to remember who's in the boat with us when these times come along. Amen. In Matthew 14, again, the disciples are on the lake. Jesus has been out praying on a mountain. He came down, and he's walking on the water. And these disciples aren't sure what they're looking at. The first thing they say, it's a ghost. No, it's just me. And Peter says, well, Lord, if it's you, call me and let me walk on the water too. Jesus said, come on. Peter literally hops out of the boat, starts to walk on the water. He's doing just fine until he looks around and he sees the wind and the waves, and he begins to sink. Save me, Jesus. Jesus reaches him down, puts him back in the boat, and he said, why'd you doubt, O you of little faith? See, again, fear comes when we start looking at surrounding circumstances. Oh, Pastor John, do you know what's going on in this spiritual war? Probably. Aren't you scared? Why? Jesus is in the boat, and he's walking on the water, and I don't have to worry. He's got the victory. The storms are going to come. But what happens is we need to realize that if we take our eyes off Jesus and we start looking at the surrounding circumstances, it's going to kill our faith. Third thing, or the fourth thing here, they were in the boat, Jesus and his disciples, and Jesus simply, you can tell he's musing, he's thinking. They just had a run-in with the church elders, and Jesus says, out of his musings, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. That's all I said. And the disciples began saying, what's he mean? What's he talking about? We didn't bring any bread with us. What's going on? Jesus says, oh, come on, you of little faith. Come on, guys. Don't you remember feeding the 5,000? Don't you remember feeding the 4,000? I'm not talking about bread. I'm talking about the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Herodians. It's like leaven. It gets things through and it corrupts things. Arguing from ignorance is a faith killer. Better thing to do is just to say, Jesus, what do you mean by that? I have watched Christians take obscure Bible text and argue from ignorance, and the only thing they do is show their ignorance and destroy their faith. If you don't understand it, if you don't know it, go look it up. Go find out. Okay? That's kind of where we are. Let's land. Here's the importance of faith in spiritual warfare. John 5:4. John says, this is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. This is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. Brothers and sisters, I hope that as we have called our attention to faith promises, we will begin to realize that we really do have a far greater power. I would be the last to stand up and say that I've got the faith that say to an apple tree that wasn't bearing apples, wither, and it withered. I'd be the last to say that. But I'll tell you where it bothers me more than anything else. We've got a community out here that is bound in sin. They're bound by poverty. They're bound by alcoholism. They're bound by abusive relationships. They're bound by sin. And while we come in here and we thank God for all the very good things that he's doing to us, Jesus told us, I want you to make disciples. And what I'm more concerned about is our lack of faith to make disciples than anything else in the world. Because it's as we make disciples that we push back the kingdom of darkness and expand the kingdom of light. And sometimes we look at the situations that are around us, and we think it's almost impossible. But as I've looked at these lessons, I think it's time that we begin to ask God to, we believe, but help our unbelief. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for what you've done for us. We thank you for the way you've blessed us. We thank you for the good things that you've given to us. But Father, as we preach just a very simple lesson on faith, Father, this is Faith 101. The people under the sound of my voice here this morning have heard all of this many times before. Father, help us to be doers of the word, not just hearers. Help us as a congregation to be a congregation that you would look at and say, ah, there's a people of great faith. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
All right, stand and take your gray hymnals, page 326. Tomorrow, consider your grandparents, your grandmother, great-grandfather, dad, brothers and sisters who have served